All right, hello. So this is part two of what was that called? The Consensus of Christ's Ancient Church and the Contradictions of the Protestant Reformation. So last time we were establishing the ancient consensus for the first 900 years of Christianity. Everybody agreed on what Christianity was for 900 years. And then the Roman Catholics had a revolution, which is what we're going to start talking about today. So the Papal Revolution. So for at least the first 900 years of the Christian era, the Church of Rome and the Orthodox churches of the East, despite temporary breakages in communion, formed one visibly united church. After approximately 1,000 years, the Church of Rome separated theologically, sacramentally, and administratively from the four ancient Orthodox Catholic patriarchates of the East. For simplicity, the schism is dated. In other words, they separated from the four ancient Orthodox Catholic patriarchs of the East. To clarify that, I didn't word that well. For simplicity, the schism is dated to the excommunications that were exchanged in the year 1054. But the separation was also a process that does not have only one key date. As the Encyclopedia of Religion in 1987 states, quote, Byzantium continued to live in a patristic atmosphere, using the ideas and language of the Greek fathers of the 4th century. But in Western Europe, the tradition of the fathers was replaced by scholasticism. That great synthesis of philosophy and theology worked out in the 12th and 13th centuries. Western theologians now came to employ new categories of thought, a new theological method, and a new terminology. Footnote number 8. Callistos Timothy Ware, Eastern Christianity in Mirceaeliade. I don't know how to pronounce that, that's why I spelled it. Editions. Encyclopedia of Religion, New York, Macmillan, 1987. Okay, that's just the book that we were talking about. Callistos Timothy Ware, quote, The Orthodox Church book, Penguin, 1993. Callistos Timothy Ware, Scholasticism and Orthodoxy, Theological Method as a Factor of the Schism, Eastern Churches Review, 5.1, Spring 1973, 16 through 27. So it's just referencing several different sources, but actually they're all different. There's several books, but they're all from Callistos Timothy Ware, it looks like. All right. But you don't have to look just from him. I mean, that's a historical fact. Coinciding with the schism of the 11th century, the rise of scholastic theology and papal absolutism made the Western Church a very different entity from what it had been when it was in communion with the Orthodox churches of the East. As the influential French Roman Catholic priest and scholar Yves, which I'm going to pronounce as Vies, I don't know, Congar, Congar, wrote, quote, Between the end of the 11th century and the end of the 12th century, everything has changed in the West, end quote. So this is footnote number 9. He's quoted in Callistos Timothy Ware, Scholasticism and Orthodoxy, Theological Method as a Factor of the Schism, Eastern Churches Review, 5.1, Spring 1973, 16 through 27 at 16. So I'm obviously Callistos Timothy Ware, obviously, when he wrote his books, had footnotes as well. So, quoting somebody there. All right, so where did I leave off there? Sorry. The Orthodox Catholic churches of the East continued the United Eastern Western Orthodox Catholic Church of ancient times, whereas the Latin Church fell into schism and heresy, since, as serious historians agree, everything was changed in the West, quote unquote. The fact that Augustinianism and Latin scholasticism constituted a radical theological change from ancient patristic theology of the East and West is acknowledged by competent modern historians of East and West. Another Roman Catholic scholar writes, referring to several Roman Catholic saints, quote, Latin theology derived from St. Augustine dominated the West and European Middle Ages and inspired the Protestant reformers, so that from St. Thomas to Malebranche, from St. Bernard to Jansensius, the history of theology and philosophy in the West was bound up with the fortunes of Augustinianism, just as if this were a second tradition mingled with the first, as if it had given on the threshold of the new age a new version of the Christian message. All right, in that statement, in quote, I should say, in that statement there were several references, book footnotes. So we got Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, is post-schism and thus only considered a saint in the Roman Church. Nicholas Malebranche, 1638 to 1715, a French Roman Catholic priest and a philosopher. Bernard of Clairvaux, 1090 to 1153, is also a post-schism, and thus he is only considered a saint in the Roman Church. Cornelius Otto Jansen, 1585 to 1638, is a Dutch Roman Catholic theologian and bishop who supported a radical Augustinian view of predestination. His teaching on predestination and implicitly Augustine's predestinarianism as well were condemned by Pope Urban VIII in 1642. And then footnote number 14, because we got 10 through 13 there. This is 14. Jean Guidon, Guitton, quote, the modernity of St. Augustine, his book, page 80, italics added, quoted in John Mahoney, The Making of Moral Theology, a study of the Roman Catholic tradition, the Martin R.C. Memorial Lectures, 1981, 2, Oxford Clarendon Press, 1987, page 68, for a summary of Dogmatic Freiburg Herder, 1952, First English edition. Patrick Lynch, Cork, Ireland, Mercier, 1955. 11th German edition, Bonn Nova Batera, 2010. English edition, James Kennan, Bastable, Reverend Robert Fastigi, Forward Athanasius Schneider, Baronius, 2018 to 2022. So these are just footnotes. All right, this, quote, new version, end quote, of Christianity, post-schism Roman Catholicism, was put together in the late Middle Ages in the West on the basis of the deviations of Augustinianism, papal absolutism, and scholastic theology. Its newness is acknowledged as a historical fact by theologians and historians of East and West. This new Western distortion of Christianity was closely examined, rejected, and officially condemned by the Orthodox Catholic Church, especially when St. Mark of Ephesus, Gennadius II Scholarius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, 1454 through 56, 1463, 1464, and 1465. The Council of Constantinople of 1484 and all of the local Orthodox Catholic churches throughout the world rejected the false Council of Ferra Florence, 1438 to 1439, which sought to unite the two, by then very different churches of East and West. So that's a summary of the split between the Roman Catholic Latins and the rest of the Christian world, basically. All right, so then the Protestant Reformations go further into error. So with the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, with its emphasis on salvation by God's grace alone, as opposed to human will and striving, human faith alone as opposed to good works, and Scripture alone as opposed to apostolic and patristic tradition of ecumenical councils, we have what is in essence a new religion, Protestantism, which is very different from patristic Christianity, and even from the new changed version of Western religion seen in the late medieval Latin Church. The doctrines of Protestantism, like those of Roman Catholicism, were examined and rejected by numerous Orthodox theologians, bishops, and councils as being irreconcilable with Christ's ancient Christian church, which continues in Orthodox churches into modern times. Footnote number 15. See, for example, the correspondence of Patriarch Jeremiah II of Constantinople, Patriarch 1572 through 1579, 1580 through 1584, and 1587 through 1595, with the Lutheran theologians of Tübingen, collected in George Mastrontinus, Augsburg, and Constantinople. The correspondence between the Tübingen theologians and Patriarch Jeremiah II of Constantinople on the Augsburg Confession, the Archbishop Icavos Library of Ecclesiastical and Historical Sources, 7, Brookline, Massachusetts, Holy Cross Orthodox Press, 1982, a translation of Acts et Scriptura, Tübingen, 1584, containing texts by Ecumenical Patriarch Jeremiah II of Constantinople and by Jacob Herbrand, Lucas Ausländer, Eberhard Binnenbach, Johann Magiris, Theodore Schneff, John Brentius, Stephen Garlick, William Holderer, John Shopsius, and Martin Crucius. See also Martin Crucius, Turco Gracia, Basel, 1584. That was that footnote. Okay, so secular historians also acknowledge how different Protestantism was from any form of Christianity that had preceded it, and that the Protestant founders' claims that they were simply restoring the New Testament church is not historically tenable. In fact, objective secular historians, as well as Orthodox Christian historians, see the Protestant Reformation's emphasis, although inconsistently, on the individual's personal interpretation of Scripture as a forerunner of the radical secularization of European thought that led down right hostility to Christianity in any form, Orthodox or heterodox. So let me repeat that because that's important. In fact, objective secular historians, as well as Orthodox Christians and historians, see the Protestant Reformation's emphasis, although inconsistently, on an individual's personal interpretation of Scripture as a forerunner of the radical secularization of European thought that led to downright hostility to Christianity in any form, Orthodox or heterodox. Protestant reformers claim to be throwing out only what was inconsistent with the teachings of the New Testament Scriptures, but this is simply not true. Historians and social scientists have proven beyond any doubt that the Protestant Reformation was often motivated by extreme iconoclasm, increasing modern skepticism toward the possibility of God performing miracles, and skepticism toward sacred things more generally. Ironically, there was not an immediate decrease in superstitious beliefs in the West about the devil and the devil's ability to perform wondrous miracles. The Protestant Reformations actually coincided with a significant increase in the practice of burning people alive who were accused, often falsely, of worshiping the devil. It goes without saying that after the separation of the Latin Church from the Orthodox Catholic Church, there arose many new superstitions, false pieties, and fake miracles. Orthodox Christians cannot defend any of these Western innovations and false claims about the miraculous. Nothing I say here should be taken to imply that Latin sacraments remain efficacious for salvation after these Latin churches fell into heresy. Yet the Protestants were not simply opposed to papal corruptions and fabrications and sacraments that were no longer salvation conveying. Protestants were often highly suspicious and skeptical and downright hostile to the ancient Christian doctrines on holy mysteries and sacraments. The Protestant movements as a whole often were highly suspicious toward wholesome Christian beliefs and practices that were found in Scripture and accepted by a consensus of historic Christianity in East and West. More broadly, the Protestant Reformations coincided with an increase in judicial torture and the death penalty for people accused of heresy or dissent. This fact has been well documented by scholars over several decades and is summarized in a 2019 book by senior Harvard professor James Simpson, a world-renowned expert in the English Reformation, and by numerous other experts. And there's a footnote number 16. James Simpson, Permanent Revolution, the Reformation, and the Illiberal Roots of Liberalism, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Belknap Press of Harvard University Press, 2019. And James Simpson, No Brainer, The Early Modern Tragedy of Torture, Religion and Literature, 43, 2011, pages 1 through 23. All right, back to the book report here. To put it bluntly but accurately, the Protestant Reformation caused a decrease in belief in the possibility of miracles from God, and an increase in belief in alleged miracles from the devil. Later, in a reversal, it was followed by a secularizing disbelief in the existence of spiritual evil more generally. Simpson emphasizes that Protestantism in its very nature is a type of permanent revolution that attacks what had long been considered sacred, including earlier forms of Protestantism, like the French Revolution did. The perpetual Protestant revolutions often eat their own, quote unquote, eat their own. Hey buddy, can you kind of keep it down over there? I'm trying to do a video here.
Yeah.
The Reformation was also undeniably motivated by a desire to make West European religion simpler and more compatible with the modernizing world, and in at least some ways easier. Another footnote. Number 17, Stephen Osment, The Age of Reform, 1250 through 1550, An Intellectual and Religious History of Late Medieval and Reformation Europe. New Haven, Yale University Press, 1980. Reproduced preference, Carlos M. N. Erie, 2020. All right, so Martin Luther had given his word to be faithful to celibacy as a friar, a type of monk, within the Augustinian religious order. But he found a life of self-denial and constant struggle not to be pleasurable for him. After Luther became the first major Protestant reformer, he clearly showed that he was motivated by a rabid hatred of virginity, celibacy, and faithfulness to one's word, which he dismissed as supposedly unscriptural oaths. Henry VIII and the Church of England's new opposition to traditional Christian teaching on virginity, celibacy, monasticism, and the sacredness of marriage was also not motivated by a desire to return to the strict teachings of Scripture. Rather, Henry, like Luther, was clearly motivated by wanting to make earthly life easier for himself and his carnal and worldly desires. Luther was blatant in his opposition to biblical teaching about virginity and good works and wanted to throw out several books from the New Testament, biblical books that condemned Luther's hatred towards ascetic struggle. A century before Luther, one revolutionary branch of the pre-Protestant Hussite movement in the Czech land of Bohemia even tried to introduce polygamy and a form of communism. The radical Protestants in the city of Munster, who were rivals to Luther during his lifetime, also introduced sexual immorality and a form of violent communism. Scholars usually date the origins of Protestantism to October 31st, 1517, and Martin Luther's first protest against the selling of indulgences, official church documents that certify that a soul would be released from purgatory, issued by the Pope of Rome or those who claimed to represent him. Strictly speaking, however, The word Protestant derives not from Luther's first protest, but from the name given to those German princes who protested against anti-Lutheran legislation at the Diet of Speyer in 1529. The first people called Protestants therefore were local German political leaders who protested any disciplinary action from the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation against Luther on account of his protest against the Pope of Rome's policies. Despite the consensus that Protestantism arose after 1517, historians also point to three pre-Protestant movements: the Waldensians, who followed Peter Valdo in 1140, ca. 1205. In continental Western Europe, the Lollards, who followed John Wycliffe 1328 to 1384 in Britain, and the Hussites, who followed Jan Hus. Anyway, 1370 to 1415. George, please be quiet, bud. Why do I keep mispronouncing that? In the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia, especially interesting. That's where that happened. Excuse me. Jan Hus is in the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia. All right, so especially interesting in this regard is the violent resolution that followed the preaching of Jan Hus or John Hus and the Hussites roughly 1 century before Luther. In 1519, Luther, in a debate at Leipzig with John Eck, famously declared, quote, "I am a Hussite," end quote. So although the Protestant Reformations in the proper sense began only after Luther's actions in 1517, the violent pre-Reformation of the Hussites was a clear forerunner in several ways. There are innumerable contradictions between and within all Protestant denominations, but all of them claim to be following quote-unquote original New Testament Christianity, and all share a suspicion toward Roman Catholic practices to a greater or lesser degree. Because Protestants are almost never aware of which Roman Catholic practices are original to New Testament Christianity and which practices arose later as abuses during medieval times, Protestants have a tendency to be suspicious of historic practices of piety and to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This suspiciousness often goes quite deep. Scholars use several terms for this fundamental tendency to Protestantism: iconoclasm, disenchantment, secularization, permanent perpetual revolution, a worldly work ethic, anti-sacramentalism, etc. Perhaps the best single word is desacralization, which refers to the tendency to be suspicious towards sacredness, and often to demote sacred things to the status of normal, vulgar, or profane. So that's 23 minutes. I'm going to stop there, I think. This is a pretty long paper, but it's very important that you know these basics. I've studied this from other books, from other sources, and basically what this guy's saying is spot on. So it's a summary. So I encourage you to check out the footnotes, the references. And even if you don't check those out, if you just study history in general, this is all accurate. So do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Pray for me, a sinner. God bless. Over now.